There are moments when God feels completely real to you, not as a concept, not as a belief you're holding on to, but as an actual presence, something you can almost feel in the room. It happens in worship sometimes, or in a quiet moment alone, or right in the middle of something painful, when something shifts inside you and you just know you're not alone. And then it fades, and you're left trying to figure out why you can't get back there, why that closeness comes and goes, why faith can feel so alive in one moment and so distant the next. That question, that specific ache, is what this is about. You probably remember the first time you felt it clearly. Maybe you were in a church service and the music was playing and something cracked open inside your chest. Maybe you were alone, crying at the end of yourself, and something settled over you like warmth. Maybe it was in nature, or in a conversation, or in a moment so quiet it almost felt like God was sitting right next to you. Those moments stay with you. They become reference points, evidence. You carry them around like proof that the relationship is real. But here's what nobody prepares you for: the ordinary days after those moments. The weeks where you pray and nothing moves, where you go through the motions of faith and feel like you're talking to a ceiling, where you try to recreate the conditions, the same worship music, the same quiet space, the same posture of surrender, and nothing happens. The feeling doesn't come. And in that absence, a question starts to form, a quiet, uncomfortable one. What's wrong with me? Because if you were truly close to God, wouldn't you feel it more consistently? Wouldn't faith feel less like seasons and more like a steady, constant thing? The contrast doesn't just confuse you, it shames you. And that shame is exactly where this needs to start. Here's the first thing you need to understand. Your brain was not built to stay in elevated states. When you feel that closeness, that warmth, that sense of presence, that emotional aliveness, your brain is doing something genuinely unusual. It's in a heightened state. The kind of state that's associated with awe, deep emotion, and moments of transcendence. And those states are real. They're not fabricated. They're not you imagining things. But your brain cannot live there. Think about it this way. You've had moments of intense happiness, a wedding, a reunion, a piece of news that made your whole body light up. You didn't stay in that state for weeks, not because you stopped being grateful, but because your brain returned to its baseline. That's not a failure. That's just how you're wired. The same thing happens spiritually. The moments when God feels close are often moments when your emotional and neurological state is primed for that kind of experience. Deep feeling, quiet attention, vulnerability, surrender. Your brain opens up, and in that openness, something real happens. But the opening doesn't stay. It can't. And this is where most people make a painful mistake. They interpret the closing as distance, as absence, as evidence that the moment wasn't real, or that they've somehow lost something. But what actually happened is much simpler. Your brain came back to baseline. That's it. That's the whole explanation. And it changes everything when you really let that land. But there's something deeper going on than just brain chemistry. And this is where it gets really interesting. Psychologists who study human attachment, the way people form emotional bonds, have found something that applies directly to this. The felt sense of closeness with anyone, including God, is not constant. It rises and falls based on your internal state, your stress levels, your nervous system, how safe or threatened you feel on any given day. When you are regulated, calm, present, emotionally available, you can feel close to people. You can feel close to God. When you are dysregulated, anxious, exhausted, overwhelmed, numb, that felt closeness becomes harder to access. Not because the relationship changed, but because you changed. This is not a spiritual problem. This is a human one. Think about a relationship you trust completely, a parent, a close friend, a partner. There are days when you feel deeply connected to them, and there are days where you're sitting in the same room and feel strangely alone. Did the relationship break? No. Your internal state shifted. Your capacity to feel the connection was temporarily reduced. It works the same way with God. On your hard days, your exhausted days, your anxious days, your nervous system is not in a state that allows you to access felt closeness easily. That's not distance. That's depletion. And the difference matters more than most people realize. And here's something important. Not everyone experiences this the same way. Some people feel God most powerfully in corporate worship, in the crowd, in the music, in the collective emotion of a room full of people. Others find all of that overwhelming and can only access genuine stillness in total solitude. Some people are wired for emotional intensity. They feel things deeply and often. Others are wired for quietness. Their faith is steady but rarely felt in sharp, dramatic ways. Neither of these is more spiritual than the other. Trauma history matters here too. If you grew up in an environment where closeness wasn't safe, where connection led to pain, or where love was conditional, your nervous system learned to protect you from deep felt connection. And that learned protection doesn't suddenly disappear when you enter a relationship with God. It follows you in. It makes felt closeness harder to reach, not impossible, but harder. And then there's the person who feels close to God often, but doesn't trust it, who wonders if the feeling is real or just emotion, who holds the experience at arm's length because they've been taught not to trust their feelings. They have access to the felt closeness, but can't receive it fully. You might be any one of these, and every single one of them is valid. But underneath all of this, underneath the theology and the psychology, there's something that doesn't get talked about enough. There's grief in this. Real grief. The kind that comes from wanting something and not being able to reach it. The kind that forms when you remember what closeness felt like, and you don't know how to get back there. And mixed into that grief is something that cuts even deeper. Shame. The quiet, persistent fear that your inconsistency means something. That someone with real faith wouldn't struggle with this. That the person next to you in the pew somehow has continuous access to a felt God, and you're the only one sitting there feeling nothing. Let this be said clearly. You are not the only one. The person leading worship has seasons of dryness. The pastor writing the sermon has weeks where prayer feels empty. The believer who looks certain has carried doubt in their chest for longer than you know. The felt inconsistency of closeness with God is not the exception to faith. It is the interior reality of almost every person who takes faith seriously enough to notice the difference. The shame is not evidence of failure. It's evidence of how much this matters to you. And here's what makes this more than just psychology. Scripture never promised you constant felt presence. Read the Psalms slowly enough, and you'll see it. David, the man described as being after God's own heart, wrote prayers that sound like abandonment. How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? That's not a man who felt consistently close to God. That's a man navigating the same terrain you're standing on right now. Job sat in silence for 7 days before he spoke. And when he did, he didn't praise. He questioned. He ached. And the text doesn't call that a failure of faith. It calls it honesty. And then there is the moment that should settle this for anyone who follows the way of Jesus. On the cross, in the final hours, he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" If the incarnate Son of God experienced felt absence, then felt absence is not a sign that God has left. It's a sign that you're fully human, in the most sacred, irreducible sense of that word. The Bible is not a book about people who always felt close to God. It's a book about people who kept reaching even when they didn't. So here is the reframe, not an answer, not a solution, just a different way of seeing what's already true. The moments you feel close to God are real. Don't let the dry seasons undo them. They happened. They meant something. And they will come again, not because you did something right, but because that's the nature of this kind of closeness. It moves. It breathes. It comes and goes like something alive. But here's what might actually be the most important thing in all of this. The longing itself, that ache you carry on the ordinary days, the reaching towards something you can't quite feel, that might be the truest form of faith you have. Not the high moments, not the felt presence, but the fact that on the empty days, you still orient yourself toward God. You still turn, even when nothing turns back. That is not spiritual failure wearing the mask of faith. That is faith. Quietly, stubbornly, honestly doing what faith actually does. It holds on in the dark, not because it feels close, but because somewhere beneath the feeling, beneath the chemistry and the seasons and the silence, something in you still believes the closeness is real. And maybe that's enough. Maybe, for right now, that's more than enough.